this is kind of more joyous in a way. But this is an interesting site again, like mine here, but in a way, but better. Ricet, as you can see on these old maps, and I think this map is actually around 1815. It's named. There's the so-called Monk's Trod, as they call it, the track over the hills, and it's right on the edge of the track, right next to the track, and it's shown in the early 19th century on this map as a very distinct feature, as a circle, as a cairn. And this is a bit fuzzy, but you can, this other map, you can see the same circles there. Ricet, as it's spelt in those days, with a H. RH, obviously a landmark feature in that great, vast, boggy expanse. And again, the 1888 map shows it as a very clear feature, no doubt about it. It's a cairn. And it was probably a way marker for people crossing, from Pont ar Elan over to the Cairn and beyond. As you can see, the road on this map isn't labelled an ancient road. We can debate whether it's an ancient road. It was certainly a droving route, by the 17th century, certainly. We don't actually know anything about it before that, but there is a map, Ogilvy's road map, which is late 1600s, if I remember rightly, 1680s, shows Pont ar Elan, and it shows the beginning of what he labelled the road to Rose Fair, or Fire Horse as it's known now. So it clearly was a known route by the end of the 17th century. And I'm sure the first section of it raises up and targeted Ricet as a landmark from where you proceed through this boggy mess. Anyway, the slightly later map, late 19th century again, it's shown, it's very much there. Don't ask me what PKT is. So picket, is it a post? It's where they've been measuring, the Ordnance Survey, I think, have been measuring altitudes. I think they put a post in. It's this 1,649.3 feet above sea level, I would guess. They put it right next to the cairn. Luckily, they didn't put it in the cairn. Hey. But then, 1911, the Royal Commission of Ancient Monuments visited it. There are at present only the remains of a fine stone mound. A few of the foundation stones, just visible in the turf, are probably in their original position. It would appear to have been about 150 feet in circumference and must have been a conspicuous object on almost the highest point of the highland between this county and Cardiganshire. Okay, nothing is known of the period of its destruction, but a small mound of stones has been heaped upon its foundations and doubtless out of its ruins, to mark the boundary of a sheepwalk. So even in 1911, it was in trouble. They were talking about its period of destruction, which is an odd comment, considering maps only a few decades before were shown as a fine cairn. So, well, we were interested in this, and we did this in part. This is one of our photographs from our upland survey, I think 2009 actually, which is a long time ago now. And that's what we found. We trundled around for a bit on. There's the Monk's Trod. We found a few stones. I mean, really, we were a bit surprised because we were quite excited about going there. But yeah, there's very few stones indeed. That's Glanhirin Farm in the distance, up to the north there. Now, okay, so we obviously have the question, well, where is the cairn? Because between those two photographs, there's no cairn as such. There's a few scattered stones. Is this the cairn? We weren't even sure we had the cairn. There's nothing, there's no mound, there's no lump, there's nothing to help us. Now, we've done the same thing as we've done in mine here, really. We decided that the answer here was to put a 20-metre grid over the whole area where we believed the cairn was, and to survey it. Now, the vegetation on the surface isn't as bad here, so it's a little bit easier. But when we went back in September, was it 2019? It was in the track now, yeah, it must have been, wasn't it 2019? We've lost a year. We couldn't see those stones that we saw. These stones that we saw 10 years earlier, that's the same area. It's looking in a different direction, but it's the same place. There are no stones to be seen at all. With the pole, we prodded around a lot and found there are stones under the grass in some places, but it was very unclear where the cairn's gone now. We were struggling. We certainly couldn't find that point that we've got there at all. We had to kind of guess it, really. We had a grid reference to work from, but even then, we couldn't get it to more than a few meters accuracy. So we had the AET man up again. Then we had Vic and Dave volunteered to help carry the tools. The weather was splendid, as you can see. It was horrendous that day. It was cold, windy, and wet. But we got on with it, and the full survey was undertaken. without too much difficulty, actually. And because it was only a single 20-metre square, it was relatively quick to do. So no one actually fell ill through exposure while we were there. Jenny spent most of the day looking after dogs, which I had to put the foot in. It's quite ironic. She's terrified of dogs, but she braved it out. And at the end of it all, we could go back down to Pont Elan where it hadn't rained and watch Ian download. This is always the exciting thing about doing geophysical surveys with Ian. He tends to bring his laptop and he downloads everything back at the car, and you can see the results before you go home, and it's always a nice touch. So what did he find? Well, again, using the resistivity survey shows a very clear black band. Now the black, again, make it simple. The black is hard, the white is soft. Okay, so there's a very clear band of harder material which he's picked up there as an area of enhanced resistance. Okay, so that's what we would undoubtedly think is a band of stone. That's in the area of the cairn. So we're looking at it and saying, okay, the cairn is here. I'm not seeing a nice circular feature there at all. It's a band of stone. And then with the others, the magnetometry survey, it just gives you a slightly different, the magnetic response, the ferromagnetic response. You get a slightly darker streak rather than the black band, which Ian is coloured in as this red streak. But if you just look here, there is a very definite oval feature, or circular, or you could say it's possibly circular. You could say it's oval. It's hard to be quite clear. He's interpreted as an oval. That looks like it's probably the cairn, the actual base, the foundation of the cairn. Can't be certain. Again, that's geophysics. But the theory is that the stone has somehow been spread out in a line, and all that's left is a little bit of, just a little trace to show us that the cairn is there. Now, there is this, I won't bring David in. I'm not going to impinge on him. But David did tell me that when he was young, he was witness to the fact that Carn Ricet was still a stone mound. And there are photographs online of this 30 years ago, when it's still a stone cairn. But that people like taking scramble bikes up and using it as a ramp to take off. And his theory is that action of wheels going back and forth has eroded and kicked the stones off the cairn, such as it was, and spread them out in that line. And that makes a lot of sense, actually. I'm sure there's some truth in that. I mean, I suspect the original stone was just stolen to help improve the surface of the Monk's Trod. It's quite boggy along that area. So a long time ago, it's probable that a lot of cairn material was just taken away. But what was left, what the shepherds had then piled back on to create a way marker. Unfortunately, late 20th century scramble biking seems to have levelled it out to a point where it's no longer a cairn. But archaeologically, there's a high chance that it's intact. It's a burial site. A cairn, or a barrow or a cairn is a site where there's a cremation burial. There's a high probability that the burial is still there. There's no reason to think that that's been disturbed. No one's dug into it at all. So the task now, having identified where we think it is, again, is to have a small evaluation excavation here to just check that is where the cairn is. So at least we can find it. I mean, our dream is, and I think that, if I'm right, Jenny will correct me if I'm wrong, but there is an intention that some stone will be taken back to the site to rebuild a cairn as a marker cairn to show where it was, to restore it to the landscape, which would be a nice thing to do. I'm sure that any walkers would appreciate having it as a feature in the landscape. But yes, so that's again something for the future. We have a blank page for that because, again, with the mine here and Carn Ricet, the intention was that it would go from the geophysics into a community excavation, invite members of the community to take part and come and assist us doing some limited excavations to see if we could find anything more out about these sites. But unfortunately, it all changed a year ago, and everything has come to a grinding halt. So yeah, I must say we did manage to do the Clear Stabber Crescent survey last summer because it was in the period when things were relatively relaxed. Even though we were not, that was never intended to be a community exercise because of the, we didn't want to get the community into the land of that particular tenant farmer because, in a busy time of year for the farming and so forth. So it was only ever going to be an academic exercise, if you like, for the archaeologists. But these two, the intention was to have a community excavation, and still is if it's possible within the time frame that the funding allows and that COVID allows. But no one can give an answer as to whether we'll be able to do that now. It may end up that we'll just have an archaeological dig with just ourselves doing them, and we'll just have to we'll have to practice doing podcasts or videos to put on YouTube or something, and just keep people informed of what's happened that way. But we'll see whether we go in the next months, I guess, and we'll discuss it with Elan links and so forth. But okay, so that's the end of that one. And again, if any comments, any questions, feel free.
I have just put into the chat, which I hope everybody can see now. I think I made it available to everybody. I've just put, it's actually a map from Ian's report, the Cwmystwyth and Pont report, which actually just shows where Cwmystwyth and Pont, Carn, Ricet and mine here are. So if you click on the chat, if you haven't already seen it, then you should be able to look at it there. Hopefully it's not too big a file. But,
okay. We're not doing too badly. 50 minutes have gone since we started.
yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to say anything, Stephanie? Or you?
No, I just said thank you, but I had my had it unmuted.
Right, go on. So we'll go on to the survey bit then.
Okay. Right, this is going to take a little bit longer to do. It's if you can find it.
Just to say, anybody, if you've got any questions that occur to you as you're going along, do put them in the chat because we can pick them up.
Yeah. And I to be honest, I don't mind if you want to interrupt at any point and ask a question if something's not clear. I won't be offended if you just say it out loud. Honestly, we're quite informal on Zoom. No swearing, obviously, but right. So no, Jenny, I think is going to start this one actually, aren't you, Jen?
I am, yeah. But you're going to move the slides along, and I can't. So anyway, well, there we go. Okay. So one other strand of work that we're currently doing or not doing because of COVID, but for Elan links, is some survey work. Some of you may know us. We're sort of quite well known for our upland survey work, and we covered quite a large area of Wales over quite a few years. And the map on the left showing the green areas. The green areas are all areas we've covered doing upland survey. Okay, it's not a large percentage of Wales, but that's quite a lot of walking for a small pair of legs. The darker, the bigger area in the middle is actually the Elenydd area, the Elan Valley, and the left-hand side of it, the western side, is Cwmystwyth, and then going up to as far as the reservoirs, basically on the east. So it's that sort of block. But as you can see, we've done lots of other stuff. We do get around and about and doing other stuff. The map on the right, just to show you where we end up doing things, all sorts of things, is what we did last year, projects we were involved with last year, even one out on the Isle of Man. We didn't get to go to the Isle of Man. It was just a desk-based exercise, but interesting to see a completely different landscape, one that neither of us knew. And but as you can see, we work across the whole of Wales. I think we've still got to do some work on the Isle of Anglesey, but I think we've done work in just about every other county in Wales. But yeah, so that's just to show a bit about who we are. So back to the Elan Valley. When the Elan Links project was being conceived and thought of, obviously to do a heritage lottery bid like the scale of this one, there's an awful lot of paperwork has to go in with when you put your application in. They want to see lots of information about what you know already, what your aspirations are and where you want to go. So one of the things that was asked for was a heritage at risk survey. We wanted to identify what sites were in danger within the Elan Valley area, what sites might benefit from some remedial work to repair them, or restore them, possibly interpret them, you know, to draw people's attention to so they weren't missed. And so we looked, I think we took records from the historic environment records of Clwyd Powys and Dyfed, and records from the National Monuments Record, and put them all into a big database and squashed them and squidged them and went through every single one of them and did a basic summary of what they were, what danger we thought they were in, if we knew so a lot of them we'd seen ourselves. So we sort of had a bit of a hands-on knowledge with those, and identifying where we could, things that were close to streams, for instance, and they were obviously getting eroded out by streams. One of the other things that we did as we did that, because we needed to understand how confident we were in our assessment of these records, was we scored the records as to how confident we were in the record as a record of something. You know, if you get somebody writing something down, the White Castle stood on the hill, do you know that the White Castle is there where they said it was on that hill, or was it in fact on another hill? It's quite hard. When we read historical accounts, we sometimes take them as they read, you know, gospel truth, that's what it is, that's what it says, that's what it is. Sometimes that's not going to be true, just like we get things wrong, people in the past have got things wrong and made mistakes, etc. So we wanted to know, when the records that have been made for these things and were in the Historic Environment Record or the National Monuments Record, how good a record was it? And by using a variety of techniques, including overlaying all the sites recorded onto things like Google Earth, so looking at them over aerial photographs, we could spot with a lot of these as to whether the place they were recorded was the right place. And those that we could not say were in the right place, didn't match up with anything that could be seen on the ground, got scored as a low or no confidence. And from this map on the screen, you can see there's an awful lot of grey blobs. So the grey blobs are the ones where we had a low confidence or no confidence at all that the record was in the right place. Sometimes it's blindingly obvious that it wasn't. We all, you know, we get things like grid references wrong, etc., etc. So it is a little bit of a coincidence, I feel, that the areas we surveyed, we found very few that had low confidence, and most of them were concentrating in other areas that we hadn't actually surveyed. But actually there's a very good reason for this, and it's to do with the timing of when they were done. You can see the area where it's concentration of grey dots, black dots, down towards the southeast there. These were all done at an early time in terms of GPS. So global positioning systems, your little box to go and record where you are. These projects were undertaken when this was surveyed, when this was just coming out. At that time, the military was actually still blocking lots of the satellites. The signal you were getting wasn't very good. Instrumentation hadn't been developed far enough. And actually, as we know now, the information we're recording, the location points we're recording of those GPS wasn't very accurate at all. We've been back over sites that certainly Paul has recorded a long time ago, and they're not where the dot is. And so that's the reason for a lot of the low confidence of these. They will be there, but the dot, the record has been recorded in the wrong place. But if they're in the wrong place, it's very difficult to manage it. You have to be able to know where something is in order to be able to manage a monument. It's no good saying, oh, well, we'll protect that area if in fact your monument is 100 meters away. So it was recognised that this area ought to be resurveyed to ensure that all the things that are recorded in the right place and help the estate manage the historic environment and what's there. There was also one little area, I think the next slide, Paul. This is the area, two areas we devised. The bigger area with the dotted outline is for resurvey. That's an area where we've got these low confidence records, and we're going to go back out, resurvey those, possibly and hopefully record more things. We know in certain areas, like down in the southeast around Grow Hill, we certainly know that David James and Vic Pardo have been out there and recorded things that hadn't been recorded previously. So as well as correcting the record and making sure we know where everything is, we're also hoping to pick up some additional features as well. And the small blue area at the top, outlined in solid blue, is actually an area that's never been surveyed intensively. Things are recorded within that area, but it hasn't been walked over and backwards and forwards, and you know, as much as possible picked up. So that's just a small area of resurvey. It's not a very big area. That'll probably only take us 3 or 4 days in the field to do. Obviously, if that's 3 or 4 days, you can see how long it might take us to do the rest of it, especially when you've got reservoirs in the way, so you can't just walk straight across. Paul? This is just an aerial view of the blue area. You can see the Elan Valley, the Elan village is off the photo down at the bottom, and then at the top you can see the road from Rhayader to Cwmystwyth going up there. So that's sort of the area it covers. Not much to say about it at the minute because we haven't been able to get out there. We hoped we'd be able to grab a day or two to go out, and then COVID got worse again, so it came to a stop. So the bigger area, we're still hoping to get out there and trying to make plans as to when that'll be. So I think Paul now is going to do the next bit, showing the sort of things we might be looking for.
Okay, yeah, well, okay. I think what the slideshow I've got from here on in is not so much the sites we will look at in the speed survey area, but just an overview of the sorts of sites that are out there and that we are interested in, and the sorts of things, if you're in Elenydd yourselves within the region, you need to look out for, and you can learn about and visit and enjoy. Now, one of the aspects, I mean, Jenny quite correctly said the thing about the problem with the GPS readings, the level of accuracy of the early readings was an issue. There's also, I'd have to add, there's an issue of interpretation, because in the last 20 years, and largely because of the experience that's come out that a lot of people have now gathered from doing upland surveys, because we've been running a complete detailed survey of the Welsh uplands since the late 1980s. It finished about 5 years ago. Not quite finished, they missed the last bit. But a lot of experience of field work and field recording was gathered in that time. So by the latter part of that, our understanding of what we were looking at changed. And you've got to taste that when we talk about Llys Abercaethon, something that was recorded as a Bronze Age ring barrow in the 1990s. Now today we would look at as more likely to be a settlement site. Because we've had a lot of time looking at a lot of sites and just got the feel for the landscape better. So reinterpretation is an important thing. There are also things out there that Jen again mentioned, Vic and David have recorded some amazingly, obvious sites that no one else has recorded, even in areas that have already had field work. And one thing you must remember, this landscape's always changing. Like with Carn Ricet, what we could see 12 years ago, you can't see now. But the reverse happens. Things you can't see today, you may see in 12 years' time. So with the passage of time, if someone just surveyed an area in 1999 or say 2001, in 2021, it will look different. Erosion could have revealed things that you couldn't see then. The vegetation will change. Clearance of vegetation, management of vegetation can reveal things that earlier workers couldn't see. So you always need to revisit. And sometimes it's just like archaeologists are rubbish and they haven't done the job properly. There's another one, to be honest, and that goes back. A very good example is in this photo I'm going to show you here now. There's the most amazing Bronze Age stone row, and this is just part of it, up Cwmystwyth and Pont. Now, again, David James is very familiar with this and has beaten us to it. I've been dying to get up there, but COVID last year put a kibosh on that. David's been up there. The area is far more overgrown now. The reeds are much higher. The purple moor grass is much, much thicker. But that isn't recorded. It's not properly recorded. The stones are recorded. There are sort of bits of a record. There are cairns associated with it. There's a complex of things up there. It's a really important piece of prehistory, just up to on the hills to the west of the reservoirs. And that's the Royal Commission in 1911. Some gentleman with a stick, wandering around, enjoying himself in fairly short grass. It's not like that now, but that needs proper recording, So there's work to do. There's always work to do for in this landscape for the archaeologist. So revisiting some of these sites, looking at them with fresh eyes is important, and making new sense of them. But anyway, so just I'm not specifically here going to look at sites within that resurvey area. I just wanted to do a bit of an archaeological sort of trip around some of the more interesting features in the landscape for you to understand why we think it's worth the effort actually for the Elan estate to get a comprehensive record of the land they own. Because another thing you've got to remember is that we're in a time where climate change is certainly a factor. Land management is now very important in this landscape because of the peat bogs in particular. There is a lot of effort, a lot of changes are going to happen. Some of them natural, but some of them are a response to natural changes to preserve the peat bogs, to control the purple moorgrass, to control the bracken, to control the gorse, etc., etc., etc. So the estate will have to go out and do things in this landscape that they traditionally wouldn't have had to do. That includes things like clearing vegetation. You start clearing vegetation with machines, you run the risk of damaging stones or cairns or slight earthworks or long huts or whatever, yeah. But so, the objective at the end of this is to have a very comprehensive record. Now, the areas that we've surveyed in the past, we've got, I would say, a pretty comprehensive record. The work's never finished properly, I suspect, but it's as good as you can get it for now. But this, we're talking about mine here, actually, and this, I talked about the cairns and Llanfedwen, just about mine here. If you can see my cursor, the Cwmystwyth Road is just down here somewhere below that hill. Mine here side is just down there. All right. This cairn was not recorded until the early 2000s. No one had noticed it. The Cwmystwyth Road drives right past it. No one had been up there. People had walked past. You only see this if you go to where I'm taking the photograph from. You've got to stand on the hill above it, then you see it. It's not the best shot because if you look if you were to turn it more to the right, you'd be looking right down the Ystwyth Valley. This cairn, it dominates Ystwyth Valley, and I know I'd like to think it's intimately associated with the Bronze Age population of the Ystwyth Valley. We can't show it to you tonight, but dotted around the immediate vicinity of that cairn, there are at least 6 to 8 smaller cairns. It's a cemetery. It's a fantastic Bronze Age cemetery. You read about Stonehenge and Salisbury Plain and all these famous places. This is as good. This is at the top end of our prehistoric archaeology. Look at the size of that cairn. It's fantastic. No one's touched it in thousands of years. Now, that's obvious, but the 6 to 8 cairns surrounding that make the rest of the cemetery group, I know where they are. Jenny knows where they are. We found them, yeah? No one else would see them. If a farmer was going to, it would be, someone was commissioned to go out and mow the purple moor grass, they could easily drive their tractor over them and damage them. So it's very important to know where these subtle features are. So we deal with some very obvious monuments, okay, some fantastic Bronze Age stuff in these hills. This is looking down the Elan Valley from the north. I can't remember the name of this particular cairn. I must say, was it Carn? It's not so important. This one's been disturbed, as you can see, unlike the previous one. This is long, and this has been known for centuries, so it's a famous landmark, really. But it's been robbed, it's been stripped of its stone. You can see just in the center there, there's not the best shot, but you can see the side, there's the kist, that's the actual grave itself where the cremated remains would have been deposited. It's open to the elements now. The cap has been taken off it, and what's happened is someone, whether it's a shepherd building a sheep shelter or a soldier on exercises during the Second World War building a machine gun post, I don't know. That is a possible. Either scenario is possible. These are fine, robust monuments, but they say these fine monuments, they're surrounded by other things. They're surrounded by much more subtle features. Just down. Looking to the Nantadernal side, this is the Wye Valley in the distance at the northern end of Elenydd. There's a nice pass there, a nice little path that drops down into the Dernal area, and just at the top of that, there's this very low mound of very small stones, which is another nice Bronze Age cairn, but very denuded, very eroded. You think of what happened to Carn Ricet. Can you imagine Carn Ricet might have been like that 50 to 100 years ago? It doesn't take many scramble bikes, or to erode it to virtually nothing. Some of these can be quite slight features. There are lovely examples. Shepherds of old were fond of gathering stones and building little piles of stone to mark their boundaries. And this is a very nice shepherd's marker cairn, marking the boundary of sheepwalk, undoubtedly. But if you notice the green circle around it, that's also stony. There's a Bronze Age cairn there. What they've done is rearrange the stones of the cairn into a new cairn. Now, the vegetation, the purple moor grass has grown over the area, and so it's like the tide coming in, really. And that purple moor grass is a problem because it does gradually obscure everything, and it hides and damages, the roots damage things. But again, if you're going to start mowing these, it doesn't take much with a heavy machine to start disturbing stones and breaking things and interfering with them. But again, you just get a sense of these sites. They're fantastic places. They're very evocative places. The views are tremendous. You can stand them and work out how they relate to each other, how they might have related to the landscape in prehistory. And you get other areas where it's quite rocky, and you get piles of stone. We don't know, is that a cairn or is it a pile of stone? We've looked at it. Can you see a structure in it? Every site. A lot of these sites bring challenges. Are they archaeology? Are they natural? But it's important to record them. It's important we know, because again, if someone's going to decide, I want to build a farm track through there, well, we need to know in advance. The estate, the owners of the land need to know in advance exactly what their response needs to be. So again, having a record of it's important. So down the Clydwen side, a very different Bronze Age monument. Actually, it's a ring cairn probably, but it's built of large flat slabs. Now, it's got this tremendous view. It's on a little knoll looking up the valley, looking just to the top of the Clywyn up there. You know, I mean, I'm just showing you these because these are obvious features. But, you know, we have features like this that we know exactly where they are now. But we have similar features, similar types of sites that were recorded in the past that we're not quite sure where they are. They may now be lost in bracken or so, or reeds. And there are even a couple of examples of scheduled cairns in the area to be resurveyed that no one has seen for decades. We don't actually know where they are anymore. They've kind of vanished. There's a dot on a map. But if you look at any aerial photograph, you can't see them. They seem to have disappeared. Now, have they just disappeared, or are they just lost in the bracken? We're not certain. So, you know, so they're not all as obvious as this. And trust me, it doesn't take. I'm old enough now to have seen cairns like this in the 1980s when I was just out of college, and gone back in the early 2000s, maybe 25 years later, and they have literally vanished from view because the heather has grown over them, and a carpet heather, and you now have to prod with a stick to feel the stone underneath the surface. You know, the landscape changes so quickly. You know, I've seen it within my working lifetime, certainly. But you get other types of very robust stone monuments in the landscape, which are less well known. They're not as well known as the cairns, but very important to the history of the hill. And settlements we'll come to in a minute. But there are things to do with medieval and more recent settlement that are absolutely fascinating in the hills of the Elan, around the Elan Valley, the Elenydd mountains. This is one of my favourite types of monument. It's very little understood, very little known, but incredibly important. You go back to what I was saying earlier about the monks of Strata, Florida, you know, used these mountains in medieval times for, it was kind of like a money maker for them. They had sheep running these hills. It was a massive industry, you know, even in the Middle Ages. The Strata Florida had a special license from the king to export its wool directly through the port of Carmarthen to Flanders, where the great woolen mills were. So they were doing well. But alongside that industry, they were, you know, they had cattle, they had horses, they had other stock animals on hills. And the Hafod tradition of dairying, which is basically dairying sheep and cows on the hill pastures in summer, is a fascinating one. And people think of it, the Hafods, as house sites, places where people lived. But it was always struck me as an archaeologist, if people lived up there with the animals during the summer, and the purpose of a Hafod was to produce milk, butter, cheese, you know, food for to feed the people. Well, how did they do that in the summer in the hills? Where did they keep all this milk and butter and cheese? They must have had somewhere to store it, surely. Well, these are what we call a sunken shelter, and they're very numerous. You'll find them close to these medieval long huts. They're basically cuts into the surface of the hill, and they put stone lining down either side. So they're like trenches with stone structure either side. And undoubtedly they would have had a timber and thatch roof over it, but they're cool stores. They're sunk into the ground. They're subterranean stores. I personally believe that that's where medieval people kept their cheese and their butter, out of the sun, you know, keep them cool and underground effectively. Makes sense to me. You always find them near a medieval house site. It's very consistent. But this one is in the Milwyn Valley on the Cwmystwyth side of Elenydd, and you know, fabulous rugged landscape. But these things escape attention. They're not highly important. We've recorded quite a lot of them. Very often people will record other things and not see these. They don't look for them. Oh, there's a long hut. Record the long hut. Done my job. Off I go. You don't look for the ancillary structures that made life at the long hut or the medieval house made it sustainable. So you know, great things like that. But and you've got sheepfolds, nice sheepfold. So the life of me can't remember where this is. If anyone knows where it is, put something in chat, because neither me or Jenny at the minute can remember where it is. The use of stone, but you know, sheep, the management of sheep and animals is very important throughout the centuries. And you know, it's been the mainstay of the local society and the local economy. And we must see, you know, and you have to see these mountains as human landscapes. They look like they look because of the actions of farmers and shepherds and others for over thousands of years. You know, this is a manufactured human landscape. It is not a natural landscape. It's a very important point that the archaeologists are always at pains to point out. Now, in the middle of all of Elenydd, in some of the morass that's in the centre around the lakes at Llyncerrig, you get, now this is where we get to very ephemeral features that are harder to spot. You can see Jenny standing on what is clearly a ring of stone there. We are not certain, again, back to the things we showed you earlier, what is it, a ring cairn? Is it a hut circle? Now, where Jenny's standing is an entrance, there's a gap, which suggests it could be a hut circle, it could be prehistoric, it could be a medieval or later sheepfold. We can't, as archaeologists, with the surface, we can record what we see. Interpreting what it is a little bit more difficult. It's probably not a ring cairn, it probably is a fold or potentially a prehistoric hut circle. But again, a site like that very quickly gets lost if the purple moorgrass comes in. you know, and you won't see it again. And there are that type of thing that may have been recorded 30, 40 or 100 years ago. We now can't find them. They now vanished from view, and we need to try to find them again, really. That same little hill near Cwmystwyth, and down the side, the rocky sides, you know, you can see there's like a rough wall there, isn't there? Jenny's standing actually on a flat platform. Undoubtedly, that platform was created and revetted on this side for a small hut. Now, again, could be a shepherd's hut, could be prehistoric, it could be a medieval herdsman's hut. But, you know, there are such small features. They're not all obvious like these hilltop cairns. They're very delicate, small things sometimes. This is over in the Gungi Valley, and the Gungi on the northern side. You know, this was a house we know was a squatter's cottage built in around 1810, 1811, and occupied for the first part of the 19th century. There's a little sheepfold next to it, but you know, the river, since it's been abandoned, the river's eaten away a lot of it. That's all that's left of the house now. So you just sometimes get fragmentary sites that, you know, and things change, and I say our understanding changes because we learn new things about them. We do new research, we learn new facts, so we can bring new ideas to bear to interpret what we see. But then you come away from the stone sites to things that to the average human being are impenetrable. You wouldn't know them. You have to be a field archaeologist, to be honest with you, to pick them out. A fabulous medieval house site right on alongside the Cwmystwyth road. This is on the CARAD side now, after you've gone over the paths that you know, for across over the Elan Valley into the Aster. As you come down, there are 3 huge earthwork platforms right above the road, which would have been the site of timber houses in medieval times. You know, just a memory again that there were people in this landscape in centuries ago. You know, when again you would have to excavate this one to date it. If there was a hearth in it, you could possibly get a radiocarbon date. You may get some sherds of pottery. There may be something that could help you date it, but we kind of know that it's a medieval house platform because you find them, and the reason we kind of know that they're going to be earlier rather than later is they were built with timber, and it's a long time since there was enough built timber in this area to build big houses. That is going back into medieval times, pre-17th, pre-16th century, really, certainly Cwmystwyth. And you know, this is a great area, the Elan Valley, one of the most interesting sites in the entire area, actually. There's an Aberglan here, and there's the farm on this side of the river. It's just above Pont Elan. It's just in the Cwmystwyth direction from Pont Elan. And you've got these lovely mounds of picket. You see them in a low sunlight, which are medieval rabbit warrens. It's a rabbit farm from the Middle Ages. And these are the mounds that they built to house the rabbits. You must remember, rabbits are not native to the country. They were brought in here and forced to live in these mounds on the mountains. Poor things, they must be a miserable time. But this site is particularly interesting because you've got several of these large mounds, these rabbit warrens, artificial rabbit warrens on the hill. And down on the road, so there's the Cwmystwyth road you can see running along there. Pont Elan is just off to the right. Aberhenllan is the name of the place just here. And what you notice is there's 2 big mounds here next to each other. And there's a big mound along the roadside there, and there's a cut on the other side of the roadside there. Now, if you read into the workings of a medieval rabbit farm, you know that the warrener, the person who looked after the rabbits, lived in a house. And that is the warrener's house without any shadow of a doubt. It's a big earthwork platform on which a timber house must have stood. And it was long forgotten when the Cwmystwyth road was built and driven right through the middle of the house site. Either the 2 ends of the house will survive, but the centre's gone. Now, the warrener's house would usually have an enclosure around it. And there would be other warrens where the breeding does were kept to keep them away from the buck rabbits. So that would be, you know, those would be these special warrens next to the warren's house. Now that is incredible, but you know, to see that surviving and the road built through it. But then what's even more interesting is these lines here are ploughing. At some point, this hill has been ploughed and crops have been grown on it. So I'm pretty sure that rabbits and crops don't go together on the same land. So now, did this chicken and egg here? Is it the rabbit or the corn came first? We don't know. You know, it's impossible to say. We can't tell in a minute whether it was ploughed and had crops grown on it before or after the rabbits were put there. But you know, but these features are so easily damaged or lost, and vegetation will overwhelm them. Purple moor grass is coming into that hill, and if it's left unchecked in 100 years' time, or 50 years' time, or even possibly 30 years' time, that will vanish, and the roots of the purple moor grass will destroy these features. So it'll have to be managed at some point, you know, and knowing where the archaeology is very important to that. I'm getting closer to the end here now. Just some more modern things in a way. This is up near Llyngunnon. You can see the sort of weather conditions we sometimes have to put up with when we do our fieldwork. But this is a wonderful, probably 18th century mine adit in the middle of nowhere. It's actually cut across the main trackway that connected Florida and Rhayader through the Clywyn Valley. This cuts right across it, which shows that trackway was out of use when they went looking for minerals there. It's a trackway which is probably as important as the so-called Monk's Trod. The difference with the Monk's Trod is it doesn't really go anywhere particular. This route went from Florida to Rhayader. The monks of Florida owned the castle at Rhayader. They controlled Rhayader. So this is a very important route. But anyway, the industry has had its impact. It's not as obvious necessarily. It's a bit more limited in its geographical spread. But there are industrial features around, again, which are very often not recorded and not understood. But certainly in the resurvey area, there are lots of mining features that have not been properly recorded, whether it's small working, small adits, trial adits, testing pits and so forth that need to be better recorded. Now, I'm just to finish on a very strong point, and I've mentioned David James several times tonight, and I'm going to mention him again because he's supplied me with this copy of this photograph. I apologise if it's, I don't know where it's come from, and I don't think David knows properly where it's come from. I haven't established exactly its provenance yet. But this is Pennegarrig Dam under construction, and this opens up another can of worms. Look at the village, the settlement that existed. This is only part of it, actually. To the right, you've got an office and I presume a house. Down in the valley, down here, there are several these timber workers' huts where workers and their families lived. There's a terrace of several, 2 or 3 houses at least there. There's a workshop there. Now, this entire episode in the history of the Elan Valley is unrecorded in terms in archaeological terms, because those timber houses were almost all removed. But you see, archaeologically, the platforms that they stood on survive, but they're not recorded. So we've got no record of where these things were. And many of these photographs show us buildings that we don't know existed. Pennegarrig was a settlement, and I've looked at the census written for 1901. There were 25 children living there and over 120 adults at a minimum count. It was quite a thriving little village. Everyone knows about Elan village. Pennegarrig was an interesting place as well, but there's no real record. There was no understanding of what was going on there. David also sent me this, Dolvolai, is it? The wooden huts there. There'll be some remains there. The huts are long gone. It's another interesting aspect of the archaeology. The platforms, the sites of these things need to be recorded. The precise locations need to be recorded. It's not just, as an archaeologist, it's not enough to look at photographs. I want to know where they were. I want to know what's left. That's the job of the archaeologist, I guess. I've looked at this, and again, thank you, David, for this one, but I don't even know where this is. I can see there's a dam under construction in the background, but I'm not certain. But look at all these huts everywhere. All the activity associated with the dam builders is going on. Well, the archaeology is like, I don't know if this area has been flooded subsequently. I really don't know. But it's kind of, the point is still made that even if it has been flooded, the locations of where these things are needs to be documented. We need to know what we've got out there. I just want to make just a point of interest. I'm going to go back here. As a simple point of interest, those familiar with Pen Bont and the bridge over the Elan below Pennegarrig Dam, there's the dam. The bridge, the road bridge, is now just about here. Where the railway comes up there, the road now follows it and then turns over the bridge here. And then in this western side, there's a car park here, is there not? Well, that end of that building is still there. It survives. It's an actual timber wooden hut, and even the little lean-to you can see at the back survives. So there's an incredible piece of dam building history in that car park that people drive past every day and don't even think about it, I don't think. We certainly hadn't thought about it until we started looking at photographs and maps and putting two and two together. The sad thing about the dam build is the Ordnance Survey never mapped the detail because the map revisions missed the main periods of activity. So there's no real detailed plan, unless there are some possibly in the Welsh Water Archives in Llandrindod or in the Post Archives, which because of COVID we can't access, of course. But yeah, so as Jenny and I have said several times, we stop at that point because in the last, I don't know what year it is now, but certainly a year ago, we should have been out doing the resurvey and the survey, and we haven't been able to do that. The COVID hit, the estate was closed down for a while, and it has never really been appropriate to go back out. And one of the difficulties is that our work was scheduled to take place on January, February, March, into April. You have to do the resurvey before the bracken and the other plants start growing in May, because by June the field survey is almost impossible. So it's a winter time task. So, you know, we know, again, you know, we've been delayed again. So even if COVID restrictions are lifted in April, should we say, it's not a good time to do field survey. So exactly where this all goes, we will see. We have no answers on that one. I will finish at that point. And again, if anyone has anything to say at all, any questions, any observations, compliments or criticisms, they'll all be accepted. Please feel free.
I'm absolutely fascinated by all of this. My knowledge of Elan Valley and the archaeological remains up there is increasing by the minute. I find the stories that have been left behind, and I feel your frustration in not being able to identify some of these piles of stones. It's heartbreaking that we have no more evidence, no more information about them. And you just bring it to life, really, and I'm most grateful for that.
Talking about the small forestry areas, and, you know, have they been recorded? And the answer really is no. There's been a little bit of survey work in them where it's come in from other areas, but they were planted before archaeology was an unorganized thing, if you like. So there wasn't anything beforehand, and odd surveys have gone into the forestry, the bits of forestry, but we know, I will mention David James yet again, but we know he sent us various things of probably things connected with the building of the dams, but we do know that there are things that aren't recorded within the forestry. So that was one point.
And David's point about the
oh yes, about the reservoirs and the shoreline, if you like, on the reservoirs. It's not a prime target for our survey, partly because in theory we want to try and target that winter period when the reservoirs are going to be full. They're also sort of more directly under Welsh water control rather than the Elan Valley Trust, if you see what I mean with that large landscape. But we do know that when the reservoirs go down, that the things are visible. A lot of them are things that can be seen on old maps. So that bit of the time that was captured by the first edition Ordnance Survey map towards the end of the 19th century, a lot of the stuff that comes out are things that are on there, cottages or, you know, the houses, Elan House, etc., things like that. I'm not certain, I don't think I've seen anybody in particular finding a cairn or something like that, although certainly on other reservoirs when there's low water levels, cairns have been actually recorded on that thing. So it won't be a focus of what we're doing. If we happen to see something, we will record it, but it's not going to be a main focus of what we do. There's sort of quite enough to do with the rest of it.
On the survey that you did and the spots of low or no confidence in terms of what's been recorded there and the other areas of risk, is there any particular feature that stands out for you that you say, so like, my goodness, we need to do something about this now?
In terms of sort of protecting them? It's not bad area in that, you know, obviously there's not a lot of development that goes on here, so it's not being threatened by that sort of thing. Erosion is the worst thing. Is it Mindseth Stone Pool that had some sheep rubbing around the bottom of it?
Yes, it's been concreted now, isn't it, to help it, I believe.
I think it's been sort of held in place now, but things like that, there were a few things like that. Several of the features are close to streams and are being eroded, and will, as the stream changes its course, will be lost. And then obviously the Carn Ricet and the mine here sort of come out of that. You know, Carn Ricet, as Paul's demonstrated, is sort of gone from view now. And now, although the footpath doesn't actually go over it, the Monk's Trod doesn't go over it, it actually is meant to follow the side, that is now just a boggy hollow. So people are now walking over where the cairn is. And so that's part of the reason for wanting to find where it is and then maybe look at some way of marking it and try and stop people walking over it further and making it a feature again.
It would certainly be a lovely community project to restore it to the landscape, as Paul so poetically put it. I mean, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. So we just got to find it first. Or find it.
Yes.
So yeah.
Can I just say on the thing about forestry, I know my geography is pretty rubbish on the map this scale, but where, you know, the loss of the Elan, of the original settlement, the original communities that were in the Elan Valley, is well documented. You know, when the dams were built and people had to leave their cottages and farms and so forth. But in some of the forests in the valley, there are actually quite a lot of cottage sites that survived. And they're shown on old maps. Now, we've seen one or two, but there's been no systematic attempt to record what's left. You know, there are definitely some bits of that old community surviving out there. So they're kind of interesting. I mean, some of that we can do through map work. It doesn't necessarily have to be done through to the surface, and that would apply to the things flooded by the valley, by the reservoir. Sorry, in the bottom of the valley. We can record those from the map record if they haven't got a record already, so we'll know where the chapel was or the church was, or various houses and so forth. I mean, if there's a lot of them are now recorded, but obviously for obvious reasons they can't be visited easily unless the water is drained. But yeah, Jessica, there's plenty out there in the landscape. I think the concern's a general one. You know, it's the, and as I said, you know, it's climate change, the need to manage the landscape. It's something that's going to press increasingly on land managers as time goes on. And the need, of course, agriculture is under pressure. There will be an agricultural response to the situation we're in, and there'll be a need. You know, we've kind of gone through a time of very intensive farming to very extensified farming, where there's far less animals on the hills. But that may go the other way. You know, in future we may find different things. You know, I mean, we all know about, you know, wind farms appearing on the hills, but we don't know really what society will demand of this landscape in the future. So knowing where everything is it gives you a really good opportunity to respond to any threats to the built heritage or to the archaeological resource then. And so, you know, and in fairness, you know, it's a big estate to manage. It's a very rare thing in this modern age to see an estate managed almost like it, you know, like it would have been managed in the 19th century in a way, with tenant farmers and upland farms, remote upland farms. Yeah, it's a bit of a curious thing, you know. So the pressure on the archaeological loss is always going to be there. Yeah, but you know, we can only do our best and give them the best chance they can of just not losing things accidentally, you know, which happens. We almost, I've just got to say this as an aside, we've been working on a report this week, nothing to do with the Elan Valley, well, for a development in Carmarthenshire where we've done the field. Well, Jenny's done the field, but there was nothing on the land, nothing at all. And we're working on the report and been looking at all the aerial photographs and, you know, looked at every resource, nothing. And we looked at the record for a cairn, not in the site, just nearby. And in the record for that, the wrong photograph had been attached to the record. It was actually a photograph of the field that we were interested in. And in that photograph, which was taken in very low winter sunlight about 30 years ago, there's very clearly a Bronze Age ring barrow in the middle of the field, which you don't see now because the field's been improved. Now, I know, so it's even that sort of thing. You know, it's archaeologists can just jump out, even if you've done the field work. Sometimes, you know, you can suddenly see things through different eyes, from a different angle or a different light, and it changes. So, you know, I think the good thing for the people, anyone who's interested in archaeology and interested in that landscape and wants to be part of it and get involved with it, there's never a point where anyone can say, hand on out, no, it's done. You know, you don't have to worry looking at it now. There's nothing you can contribute. There's nothing you can offer because we've done it all. It would never be like that in Elenydd. It changes with the seasons. It changes with you know, the time of day, the angle of the sun, the direction of the wind can change it. It's quite remarkable actually. But it's you know, it's a fabulous place to be involved in.